Welcome to the Remarkable Dentist Podcast with me, Fred Joyle, where I interview amazing dental practice owners digging into their successes and failures, their insights and hindsights, getting their views on where dentistry is going, and discovering what it took for them to become remarkable. Welcome to another episode of the Remarkable Dentist Podcast, where I talk to people in the industry who do incredible things, innovative things in the industry, whether they're dentists or business owners. And we are very lucky today because we have a really unique business that has been formed by this very unique woman, Christine Sison, and her company is Swiss Monkey, and we're going to find out what Swiss Monkey does, why the hell it's called that, maybe even we'll dive into, and find out how it can really transform how you operate your practice. So, Christine, welcome to the show.
Hello, Fred. Thanks for having me. I'm excited. I've been waiting all week for this. So,
me too. I couldn't eat or sleep or anything. I was
it
so
is what
excited.
it is. You know what? Waiting all my entire life was meant for this moment. So let's make it happen.
Okay, so what does Swiss Monkey do now? And then give us the Marvel superhero origin story behind it.
All right. So Swiss Monkey, we'll talk about the name later on. I'm sure it'll always come up. But, kind of the Cliff Note version of it is we provide virtual front desk and staffing solutions for dental practices all across the country. So I like to tell my doctors, think about it as you'll have your on-site team, and then you're going to have your off-site team. And together we make your complete team. So our doctors, we work with private practice doctors all the way to DSOs, and every practice has different needs. So some of them will just say, hey, I just need an interim solution to get down my $500,000 of AR. And then we have some practices with no front desk at all. We can probably talk about how COVID has done that, where they've been operating the last couple of years with no front desk. It's not ideal. It's not for everyone, but it can be done if we need to. And then kind of the rainbow in between. So everything from like just with phone support or hygiene. And so, and most of my offices, they're pretty fluid in what kind of offsite team that they have. But the goal here is to give both the doctors and their managers and their team an ecosystem to tap into in case there are fluctuations in the front desk, right? So we're trying to minimize kind of the staffing disruption when things happen. And we know that things do. Anyone that's run a practice knows what that 6 a.m. text looks like, or someone's moving. And so the goal here is to give our doctors a little bit of insurance with regard to staffing and their operations.
So this is the magical new word that's coming out called outsourcing. And so I'm gonna boil it down to something really simple that what I tell dentists to do is, wouldn't it be better to have a 24-hour front desk person who is trained to do just that and is never distracted from doing just that? That is the core of what you're offering. And then right, and then additionally, all sorts of other back office, non-clinical, you can outsource a ton of the non-clinical procedures, but that core thing is to solve, I'll say this as the 1-800 dentist guy, the number one problem we had for 30 years with the referrals that the doctors were paying us for was what happened at the front desk. Yeah. It was an average of 50% loss of those referrals. They were throwing away that money that the doctors were spending.
Yeah, that's right. I think for us, we look at, when you look at kind of the practice model, anything not patient facing, we can't take it off site, right? To create that kind of hybrid model. It doesn't mean that you should. And I think, COVID has really forced doctors and big corporations to think about, where are there opportunities to expand the offsite team model. And I say expand because a lot of my doctors don't realize that they're already doing they already have a hybrid model, right? They probably have a coach that's not on site. They have accountants, a marketing team. So those are kind of, I call them like micro experiments, right? You already have a hybrid team. Maybe right now it's 95% is on site, but if they have a coach, if they have their attorneys and they're not, that is still kind of within the framework of a hybrid team. And I think for us, we're really starting to extend that same kind of philosophy to say, hey, let's include more operational tasks. Right. And I think one of the things I'm looking to do is the industry has always called it outsourcing. And for me, it gives a sense of it's very transactional. And at least here with Swiss Monkey, what I want to do, and especially for our smaller doctors and our practices, where they get really nervous when it feels transactional, like they spend a lot of money on their practice, it's their baby. And so I like to use more kind of the offsite hybrid team because I think it feels much more much more non-transactional, and it gives them the sense that it is kind of a much more dynamic communication between on-site and off-site. Because I think traditionally it's more like you use outsource, and they think of it somewhere really far away, right? And it sounds very, it just sounds like it's a little scary. Who's touching my patients? And I know when I was getting into this, I was really nervous. Like, who's going to be answering my phone? I spent a lot of time, building my practice, building my brand, and at the minimum, you want to do no harm. Right. And I think for us here, we take a huge premium. We're born out of the private practice PPO fee for service model. We know how much time and energy that doctors and their team spend on building their brand. And it absolutely matters the kind of team that you have offsite. And I'm happy. I think this market is growing a lot. I'm starting to see even the last year, different types of companies come into this, which I think is great. It's nice to have options, but there are a lot of different flavors, and it does matter the kind of team that you decide to interact with. And you get what you pay for, right? And so I think as doctors are thinking about this model, I want them to be informed about what types of flavors our types of companies come in, so that you make an informed decision whether or not it's just cost or whether you're looking at quality. And there are certain tasks that can be, that it just depends on what you're having your offsite team do.
So that brings up what I really wanted to ask initially, that a lot of doctors are wondering about is, does this save me money or does it make me more money?
It depends on the horizon that you're looking at it, right? And so, and it also depends on the service. So I think for us, like we've always, at the end of the day, it has to return. Like, I don't want you spending $500 on us, and then after 2 months you're still not getting anything. It doesn't make sense. You're a business, you need cash to run, right? And you shouldn't outsource it if it's not making your name, or it's not allowing your team more time to produce more money, right? So my sense is that over the next few years, kind of the P&L, the fundamental kind of expenses of a practice are going to change. You're probably going to have a higher expense line for operations, probably for technology. But my guess is that when you start to do that, it's going to give your on-site team more room to focus on top line, right? How much money you're making. So I think things are going to change in terms of the proportion. So it depends on the practice. It depends what you're outsourcing. What I found is, one, it should take less time to do things, because you're usually choosing a team to do one thing versus having your team do multiple things. So let's just say insurance aging, like following up on past due claims, might take your on-site person a few, maybe say 10 hours a week because they're doing so many things. But if you outsource it, maybe it's only going to take 2 hours because it's just focus time on that one activity. So the goal here is that you're going to have a specialized team. Hopefully it takes you less time and you get more return, and that over time you can end up actually increasing your revenue. So that's really my goal, is that we're going to offload things that are important, but they don't need to be done on site. But then we work with, ideally they have a coach or their managers or doctors, and we say, hey, we're going to have Fred stop doing X, Y, Z. But what I want him to do is start providing really great patient experience, check in and check out at the counter. I want them to start to call unscheduled treatment. I want them to do right side dentistry, so that over time, you're also now looking at actually increasing the production of your practice at any given time.
Because the number one way to produce more is to have a full schedule.
That's right.
And if you're helping them, I've been telling doctors this for years, look, even if you have somebody at the front desk for 35 hours a week, let them that be their entire focus. But what about all the other times? How can they connect with you online? How can you fill the schedule when somebody cancels at 8 o'clock that night? what can you do about that? You can do nothing because you're clearing the voicemail and finding out they're not coming at 8 or 9 a.m. as opposed to a service that 24 hours a day can say, okay, let's reschedule you somewhere else so that the person doesn't slip away for the next 90 to 180 days. And two, let's start plugging that hole. Call people and say, I understand you want to get in anytime. You have that hit list in the practice. It's like, plug me in as soon as the ASAP list, I think they call it. But most softwares do that, EgoSoft and Dentrix. They have a list of people to call and say, would you like to come in tomorrow? And fill that schedule. Nothing more expensive than an empty schedule. It's a restaurant. Basically, if you don't make money off that seating that day, you don't make money. You've lost money that you'll never get back because you lost the time. And I think that's the number one benefit that you have, just by, even if it's not totally offloading the front desk, but it's just saying, look, if the phone rings 3 times, now it comes to us. If it's after hours, it comes to us. If you're going to lunch and you decide to all go, it comes to us. That's a transformative thing on filling the schedule. And I always rant about this too, is that the classic situation at the front desk is just when you get that person optimized, really up to speed, doing exactly what you want them to do, they quit.
Yeah, let's talk about that. I think one of the things that, I shared with my daughter that they're really intrigued by this model. It's like an insurance policy, right? In the sense that, like, we're transferring the knowledge to a kind of a stable base. Like, it's intellectual property. How do you manage the knowledge, right? And I think the biggest thing for most small businesses is when that front desk person leaves, what do you do? Right. And I think, when you have more locations, you have kind of bigger resources, that's something that you can manage better. But a lot of my doctors are 1 or 2 locations. Maybe they only have 1 front desk staff. And at that point, they might not need me. They're like, hey, I'm fully staffed. But then that person that's been there for 10, 15 years ends up retiring. They end up moving. They go part-time, whatever it might be. Then the call to me, I'd be, hey, you know what? I'm more open to what this looks like, because now we have an issue, because now that one person is taking all of that knowledge with them. And so the goal here is that, can we take some of the systems, the knowledge, all of that stuff, and say, hey, let's spend a little time up front, invest in this kind of hybrid model. Let's institutionalize what happens in your practice offsite, so that it's something that we can tap into should things change, right? It's been a lot of doctors use us saying, hey, this person's gone, I'm adding on another person. Can you help train them, or can you help provide them some structure as to what we're doing? Because now we have it. We've kind of documented it. It's there. Our team knows how to schedule them. We know what insurances they're contracted with, because God forbid someone leaves and they're not able to give that 2-week notice, and that doctor has no idea who they're hiring, and nor should they. I don't think that's their specialty. So our goal here is to just give them something, a partner, in terms of how to manage those changes.
And I think the situation became much more amplified during COVID, because they realized even some people got sick and just couldn't come to work for weeks, or a family member got sick and they couldn't come because they were technically contagious. And all of a sudden there were these giant gaps, instead of just, oh, I've got to give them 2 weeks off, or, the dreaded maternity leave situation, because that's what happens. Many of the employees are at childbearing age. I had a friend of mine. She has, her. I won't mention her name, but she has 30 something employees. And her record was 13 people pregnant at the same time.
Something in the water.
Yeah.
And you know what? Let's the idea of this kind of offsite team is not new. I'm not going to take credit for it. This has been, this, you've got 100. This has been around for a long time. And I think what happened during COVID is it forced a lot of doctors to come and revisit the model, right? And I think we're starting to really flesh out the promise of what we can do with this hybrid team. And because the gold standard is on-site, in person. That is the gold standard. I'm not going to say, hey, the gold standard is off-site. I have a practice as well. I have as a dentist. I prefer to have someone on site that knows everything, that's fabulous, that's consistent, that, that is reliable. Right. So I don't think what we're saying is that this is on par with that. I think a combination and having a good blend is going to be the ideal kind of optimal model moving forward. I don't think we're going back. I just heard of this trend that in 2030, half of the working population are going to be part-time workers, right? Because they choose to, and also probably because there might be things where it's not going to need full-time employment. That is a big deal to businesses in terms of how we operate, right? If half of the population in 2030 is going to be part-time and they're not available for full-time work, we better have some really good systems in place, very good training in place so that you can manage that, right? And I think that's where there's a lot of opportunity for other players like Coaches and whatnot to be able to help fill that gap, because when you're one location, two locations, you're not going to be able to have enough manpower or resources to really manage that type of operations. That's very different. I think business now, we are structured for full-time workers. We're not structured for part-time gig. We're just not. But that's where people are moving. The millennial Gen Z want that. They're going to have richer careers. They're going to have I think different types of vocations over their career. That's very different probably than in the past. And I think we need to be okay with that, and we need to prepare. Let's not pretend that's going to happen. And the other stat I just heard that was pretty phenomenal is that 60 to 70% of millennials have some kind of side gig already, right? Some kind of passion project, right? And so I think we should just, as a small, let's embrace that. We know that that's where it's going, right? It's a very strong tide. I think we just need to prepare ourselves that that's going to be the new operating model. And as part of the healthcare industry, we probably need to get kind of our shift mindset and those intensives and those training programs ready for that, because that's where we're going.
And then let's add to this what I've been preaching for years is one of the most powerful marketing tools you have is convenience, which means expanded hours.
Yeah.
So who's answering the phone at that point? How do you use that very expensive facility for 60 hours a week, especially when you've got 2 out of 3 people want part-time hours? As you're saying, we have been this rigid model, and unfortunately dentistry, we run by a 10-minute clock. And so people being late throws everything off, and people not being there, people calling in sick, people needing time off for whatever reason, people retiring, people moving away, asking for part-time shifts or flexibility. I mean, what you're talking about is millennials in particular, which will be 75% of the workforce in the next 3 years, by the way, will be millennials. They want flexibility. That's really hard to do with the old practice model.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. I think this idea of how do you provide the flexibility? How can we have a system that's agile enough to be able to accommodate that? Now that we're going to have some, I think, we need to get our job done too as businesses, right? I think continuity of care is really important. And so that's where I think the infrastructure, the training program, all of those, they have to be very tight. You need to have really good documentation process. You've got to have some kind of training program. You've got to have the good, right blend of technology, because I love, we have a ton of technology partners. And I think there is going to be a stronger blend where technology can start to replace a lot of the route tasks, a lot of the automation, insurance, things like that. I love the way that's going, but it's never going to replace kind of the people person, right? I think that's a little bit, that's further down the line than I think in the next 5 years, right? So I think we're going to need to have I think doctors are going to have to think about what is the right blend for us, and where does technology make sense, and where does, having the right people in place, support that and audit that and make sure technology is actually doing the right thing.
But to counter that, I know doctors that operate completely with a kiosk. Yeah. No front desk whatsoever, and have been doing it for 3 or 4 years. When COVID hit, it was perfect for them. They didn't have a problem to solve. So people are getting more and more used to that idea. But you can still have a really friendly, outgoing, energetic team. You can have a greeter if you want, but make that more of the job so that they're always attending to the people who are coming through the door, not the other 5 things that you've handed them to do. So this leads me to the other things that you do. I focused on front desk because I think it's cornerstone of business success, is doing that phone right. And the payoff is in production, not in savings. I'll tell doctors, you're better off hiring 2 people to be there, even if you think you only need 1, because you're paying her $35,000 a year. That's one big case. You are gonna capture that every other month, if not every month, if you've got a good workforce front handling every call, keeping that schedule full. Because keeping the schedule full now, a lot of doctors don't even realize this, is a combination of phone calls, email, and text.
Yeah.
You're juggling. Sometimes you're doing all 3 with the person. They say, like, let me just email you about it. I need to change the time, but I got to look at this, but can you text me this? And I the great front desk people, they're running on. It's like the Starship Enterprise. They're just running this whole multi-interface technology to keep that schedule full.
Yeah, and I'm gonna think of 2 things. So one, I think you're absolutely right. One of the jobs that I find I have to do when I'm speaking to managers and to doctors about this model is that they're very cost focused. How much is this going to cost me? Versus, I think what you just made a really good point is, how much money is this going to be able to make me, right? And I think we're trying to kind of say, hey, I understand that this is going to cost you, but it's going to return X amount, right? It's going to allow you to produce that. And I think that tends to be a mind shift change, because we aren't focusing with tons of money usually just to be able to kind of, to do with whatever with. So I think that's something we're trying to shed more light on in terms of how to think about investment. And then, and that's hard because we talk to a lot of managers who are kind of like the gatekeepers, right? And they're like, oh, that sounds really expensive. And I think we do have to spend a little time saying, hey, but what does it allow you to do? Right. I think once we kind of kind of open their eyes in terms of how to think about that, which is from the business owner perspective, that's been, I think, a game changer for us.
Well, and this is what they don't see, because it's very hard to measure, is what are the missed opportunities. There's no recording of the patient who got away. There's no tracking of what that patient would have produced, who that would have led to the practice. What are the 5 patients they could have brought in? And so when I talk to doctors about your business, I say, what's your marketing budget? Are you spending $4,000 or $5,000 a month in advertising? What if you're losing 20% of those new patients because you're not handling them well?
Yeah.
How many hundreds of thousands of production is that?
Yeah. And I think that's something, as like something that doctors and maybe coaches, and we have to kind of think about how to realign incentive, right? That we're saying, hey, it doesn't matter who does it, whether it's onsite or offsite, that we have to kind of think about incentives so that your onsite team is open to like saying, hey, to hit X amount of goals, I'm open to having an offsite team do it. And it's just something new that we have to think about, because typically when you're on site, you're like, no, we're just going to keep it all in house and we don't want to spend any money. But I think part of that is thinking about, it doesn't matter whether or not you're here or there. The goal is to hit this number. And I think if we can align incentives so that even the on-site team can be open to different people or different resources kind of hitting those goals, I think that's another thing that is changing in dentistry in terms of how do we align incentives so that it's really focused on hitting certain metrics.
Well, and that's the other advantage of a coach, like a fortune management coach, is they help you look at the numbers and say, this is an expense. This is an investment. Marketing and advertising, those are investments in the growth of the practice, unless you're not answering the phone well, in which case they're an expense. But look at a more effective front desk as an investment that yields an ROI, that has a multiple associated with that investment. There are things that are expenses. The cleaning crew that comes into the office, that's not an investment. It's, your insurance costs are, to maintain the practice. Those are expenses. But anything that's going to drive opportunity, that's going to increase patient flow, that's going to increase patient acceptance. All of these things are about creating that experience. Those are investments that in this beautiful dental model, where if you add another 100,000 in revenue in the practice, 80% of it is profit.
Yeah, I think you hit on a really good point there. It's who's on your side, right? Who's on your corner. And I think for us, the magic kind of combination is always having, we work very closely with Fortune. And I think what's been really nice is having kind of we call them like your fractional strategic officer, right? Like someone there that looks at strategy from a high level perspective, and obviously the executive coaching aspect. Then you have your operational team, then you have your on-site team, then you have kind of all your legal attorneys and all that. But really for us, when we work with the coaches, they're able to outline, here's the strategy, right, that we're trying to move towards in the next year. And then they provide that to us and we say, how do we help to execute them? Because obviously at the end of the day, you still need you need power to be able to execute the strategy. And I found that to be a really great blend in terms of like having those players as part of the team, and vice versa. At some point, we are really focused on the operations. Usually they come to us like an emergency patient. There's some kind of like bleeding that needs to happen that I need to stop. They're not ready to buy new equipment. They're not ready for coaching, right? Because they just lost 3 people. Like that's the last thing on their mind. And what's been, I think, really helpful for us is that saying, hey, let's get you stabilized. Right. And once they're stable, then they're more open to, now they're ready for coaching, right? They're like in a better state of mind to be more open to coaching and to thinking about kind of the long term. They're ready to buy the new equipment or whatever it might be. So I think for us, that's been a really good kind of partnership with both of our reps and also Fortune and our coaches, just to make sure that they're in the right mindset. And so is their team, that they're not feeling so burnt out. They can't do all those extra things that are really important because they're so burnt out. They can't provide that excellent phone voice because they're stuck within, on insurance for 50 minutes. So, you know how it is.
Yeah. And that's so much of what you can offload in the practice so they can be a patient-focused practice. One of the other things that you're providing is you'll actually do recall on the patients. You'll go through the delinquent patients or the pending treatment that is unscheduled. You'll do that as well for them, won't you?
Yeah, like anyone, and if anyone's been in the office, no one calls hygiene patients unless your hygiene schedule falls apart. I mean, there are some who like go above and beyond, but most of my practice is in a room, like no one's like going ahead of the game. Like, let's call all of our 1,000 past due patients. They're so focused on the schedule and filling that. And it's important, we should call, but the reality is like anyone that's in the office, like we don't have time. There's just so much happening. And you come in, your little voicemail light is red. We know there's probably like half of those are probably reschedules or cancellations. We're really focused on kind of just that day to day. And so we do the recare. And you probably know hygienists have been, it's like very difficult to find. And so we try to call the hygiene patients. I'd rather have them on the schedule because we can move them up, right? Even if it's like 2 or 3 months out, I'd rather have them on there. We can always move them up versus like anyone who's tried to call a hygiene patient or family day of, it's really hard to get them in, right? So let's get them on the schedule, even if it's further out, we don't have the capacity right away, get them on the schedule, mark that they're able to come in sooner if something comes available, and have that kind of, have that flow to tap into.
Yeah, it comes down to a full schedule, and it comes down to patient acceptance. If you've got a person with pending treatment, they're already a patient. So all you're trying to do is find out why they haven't come in. Is it money? Is it time? Is it don't understand the treatment? When you've got one of your people, that they're detectives on the job, figuring that out, which when somebody in the office is doing it, they have one goal: to check off that they called that person. That's not the job. That's not striving to turn pending treatment into treatment. So it comes down to who's better trained to do this specific task and actually likes doing it rather than is doing it just to be done. Yeah, that's the beauty of to me of outsourcing, is you isolate the skill sets and refine them. Your people are better front desk people. I have no doubt that rarely is somebody in somebody's office a better front desk person than you are. One, because they're trained, and two, because it's all they do.
Yeah, and I'll say this too, as we kind of work with our doctors in terms of what should be done offsite versus onsite. There are some things where, I think that there should be stuff that's probably better suited. Like if a doctor has very special needs and they like to schedule a certain way, sometimes, it may be better for the on-site team to do that. But then what they're telling the doctor is, hey, I don't have time because I'm doing insurance aging. Right. And so I say, like, I tell them, let's figure out what's preventing them from doing the stuff that you want them to do. And let's take that off. Sometimes what I'll come into an office and what they want to do is they want to outsource all the really hard, complex stuff that should really happen inside the office. And they want to keep all the easy stuff, right? They want to do the insurance aging, but they're like, hey, for my specialty office, I want you to call the unscheduled treatment, right? And then and so that's not, just because you have a hammer, not everything is a nail, right? So I say, hey, let's figure out, this model works when you have the hybrid team doing kind of very, like, the more simple things first. Start there. Don't start off with us doing the most complex things unless you absolutely need it because you're understaffed. They usually say, hey, start off with and that's where I find the success really happens first, is like the simple things first, right? Unless you have no front desk and we'll do all that. Or they're willing to train kind of the treatment tends to be much more specialized per doctor. But you're absolutely right. If they're willing to say, hey, I want to have a specialized team doing X, Y, Z, when you have that focused training, absolutely over the long run, that's going to be a better investment just because you have a team that really knows how you like to schedule.
Yeah, and I like that you do it almost like a training wheels approach. It's like, let's not set up 15 things that we're handling for you in the practice. Let's find the biggest pain point maybe, or the biggest gap, and let's outsource that. Let's not make it complicated. Let's not confuse the heck out of your team or throw the rhythm off in the practice. You want to make it run smoother. You don't want it to have to dip and rise to get to outsource. Outsourcing should be like, once it happens, it's like, oh, this is better.
Yeah, and I'll go through a couple of things here. Just what we found to be really successful in adopting this model kind of to this full potential is that, we're really sensitive to the fact that, like, the onsite team, a lot of them are very nervous, right? They hear about hybrid teams, they're like, oh my God, am I going to lose my job? They're very scared, like, in terms of like having this other party come in, they have no idea who we are. So when we come in there, we're really, I tell the doctor, how you integrate us matters. The narrative you're telling your team matters. People are really stressed out. And if you say, hey, we're coming in there, I would feel very threatened, right? And so I think we have to be very careful with our language. We want to take a slow approach. Sometimes my doctor's like, yes, absolutely. I want to do all 18 things and I want to have one person in the front, right? It's very disruptive. Like, this is not like switching out glove box A for glove box B. This is like changing workflows, changing behavior, changing expectations. It's extremely disruptive, which is one of the reasons why we see innovations in healthcare take a long time, right? This is not a simple kind of like switching out one thing for the other. We're really sensitive about that. And so we say, hey, start off with one thing, right? Low hanging fruit, the ones that I know will be successful. It's easy for them. It doesn't take a lot of behavioral change. Once we do that, we build trust, right? That they trust us, we trust them. Then we can do another thing. Like, if we're not going to change the whole practice in the first couple of months here, it's going to take 2 to 6 months to kind of start to realize, all right. And then the team is also more open to this kind of model. I think that as I'm going through this is one of the biggest things that I'm trying to shed more light in terms of how do you adopt this model? Because if you come in here and your team and you have an unrealistic expectation of how fast this model moves, yes, we can deliver bang right away, right? First month, yes, you're going to see some changes. But in terms of like realizing the full value of what this model can have, it takes time. And so especially during these times, people are really stressed out. There's a lot of things going on. Do one thing at a time. If no one's going anywhere. These problems, that AR is still going to be there. We'll start to move things over slowly. But I think for us, that's one of the things we take a lot of time in, because I don't want people feeling like there's just another thing that they have to do.
And the other mentality that is pervasive, because it's a scarcity mentality, is, oh, they're going to obsolete me in this job. And people say, and people see this when you come from scarcity, that's your reaction. When you come from abundance, you say, oh, now I can do my job better because all of this stuff has been taken off my plate that can be handled better by someone else. And I can do all the stuff that only we can handle in the practice, which is makes it, I keep using the term patient focused, but I'm about the remarkable patient experience. How you handle those calls, how you schedule people, how responsive you are is all about being remarkable, and how your team gets to focus on those things rather than rudimentary repetitive tasks, things that are tedious maybe. And as you say, if you're sitting on hold for 40 minutes waiting for the insurance company to come on, that's a ridiculous use of time. And every single practice that accepts insurance has experienced an increased amount of time that they are spending processing insurance claims.
Yeah, absolutely. And, also as doctors are thinking about this too, there are certain things you can't fix with a hybrid team. Like if you have a culture issue, I can't fix that, right? Like those are things because sometimes they'll ask us to come in and there's a huge culture thing that's happening, right? And it doesn't work. It just like, you can't fix that. If there's already a lot of tension and mistrust between the doctors and the team, yes, sometimes we can start to like kind of play a middleman because now you have like an offsite team. But honestly, you're never going to hit kind of the full synergy because there's a culture issue, right? So we can't facilitate that. That's where we bring in some coaches, right? And sometimes it gives the coaches a little bit more room and some transparency, saying, okay, this wasn't done right, and we can provide kind of some more data behind how like the bills are being paid or their accounts, and the coaches like it, the doctors like it, and there can be a more agnostic kind of data set that they can look at, saying, yeah, you really weren't that good at this job, right? Or vice versa. And so our goal here is, we don't want the on-site team to feel nervous about this. We're on the same side, right? And a lot of times, sometimes if they're not doing it the right way, most of the time it's not because they're trying to come in there with bad intentions. Sometimes they weren't trained correctly. And so I think that's why the narrative of why they're doing this, a lot of our coaches do a really great job, especially at Fortune, in terms of the reason behind this kind of hybrid, this kind of more focused hybrid model, in terms of why they're doing that. I think that it helps the on-site team, I think, feel less threatened by it. But it really does matter in terms of how you integrate it.
Well, and talking again about Fortune coaches, one of the things that they can do is they're coming in and they're running a diagnostic on the practice. So if they see the culture as the problem, they know to sit down with the dentist and say, we have to address this. We have to find out who is poisoning the well here before we try to execute everything else that can easily put in systems in place and outsource some things and add technology and things like that. Before we do that, we have to address this. Or you've got 120 days of accounts receivable and it should be zero. Let's figure out why that's happening and address that. And the great thing about a coach is just like when you go to a doctor, they're going to figure out what's the most important thing to treat first. Yeah. Before we get your nails done and get hair plugs done and things like that. And so I totally digressed into some weird space there. So we need to know. All right, say what you're going to say, but I got a question.
Yeah, I have one more thing. I think one of the things that we have been helpful, especially with when they find an issue, is that if for some reason the doctor needs to make a change and they're feeling, I use this kind of term, like feeling taken hostage, right? Like you have no other choice, because what happens if that one person leaves? They have all the knowledge, they have all the, like they're billing a very specific type of way, and we can't, that we can give them something to lean on while they're looking for something else. And I think it gives a lot of our doctors, a lot of their coaches, just like, you can make that change without feeling so nervous. Because I know when the practice is a certain size, you usually have one or two people that knows everything. And if something happen, you feel like you're taken hostage, like you have no other choice. Your back is against the wall. You have to keep them there. And I think what we're saying is like, no, like there are certain things that there are best practices. And if we need to, we'll come in there and we'll give you kind of a lifeline while we are making that kind of transition. Because you're right, if they are a bad fit for the culture, I don't want you to feel taken hostage. And most of the stuff you can, like there are certain ways that you should be running the practice, I would say. And so I think giving them, that resource has been really helpful.
Okay, so why the heck is it called Swiss Monkey?
Here we go. You know what? I'm just gonna say there were some drinks involved, Fred, and that's what that's what happens. It's just don't make those kind of choices. But and I think I remember when I was like thinking about it, I'm like, do I really want to answer the phone? Like, thank you for calling Swiss. That was my thing. I'm like, do I want to be that person? Like, if this goes south, like this could go bad. But I was like, we're gonna double down. It feels good. There's some drinks involved, and now it's and now here we are.
So, well, there's tons for more that we could talk about, but I think our listeners need to know that outsourcing is a tremendous resource that you need to open your minds to and start exploring, because it's going to make a difference in your workflow and your productivity. And sometimes it's significant. So Swiss Monkey, find out more about that at swissmonkey.io. That is Christine's website, and she can also be reached at Christine@swissmonkey.io. Tremendous resource for you. And thanks for all these insights, Christine. Is any parting shots that you want to offer people as we end this?
Now, remember, we were going to talk about any complaints or concerns. We go to Fred's cell phone, so he'll give that to you.
Right, my personal line, which the voicemail box is always full. So please leave a message.
No, I think, and thank you for taking the time to speak to me. I'm really excited about this. I think if doctors are just interested, just to give us a call so we can at least walk through some options. I think if they can get an inventory of what's available to them, that's the best thing, right? It's just, you don't need to use it now. You might not need it now. Don't use it just because. Use it when you need to. But I think for us, it's like letting doctors know this is available to them, and if they need it, it's here. So thank you, Fred. I appreciate taking the time today.
Happy to do it. Great to have you on. Remarkable listeners, this is just one more remarkable tool in your practice toolkit. Check it out. As Christine said, explore this so that you know what is available to you. And otherwise, keep on becoming remarkable.